So yes, there's like a bunch of topics. I mean, we went over. We probably should go over the definition of reactionary again. I think a lot of it has to do with Enlightenment thinking, like neo Enlightenment, like thinking that the Enlightenment was the pinnacle of philosophical thinking in the world, especially in the West. I think that's true. So I think that is in line. And I think that's why it might seem like progressivism and reactionaries share a lot of views because we want it's both in the sense that we want the world to be a good place, and I think the disagreement is how we the means to get there. Um, but love, like to me, the main core of my political views are compassion and love. It's like love for civilization and love for the humans that live in the civilization. And I feel that if this is the way to do it, the people aren't very smart and they don't know what's best for them. And that's why authoritarianism is important. But also, I think liberty is also a good value, which seems contradictory, but it's not. But I think liberty can only occur in the framework of with limits. So I think if you just have unlimited whatever, like anarchism, then you obviously don't have freedom because you wind up with a Chaz. And I think Chaz is a good example of what we get when we just push for plain old anarchy or libertarianism to its limits. So I'll let you respond to all that.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of problems that come up when you do anarchy, um, and it turns out that all of those problems that need to be solved, we put are more important than our values. So,
That's a great quote.
um, pure anarchy gets compromised extremely quickly because there are so many problems that are not solved.
That's. I think you hit the nail on the head. Wow, that's really brilliant. I haven't heard anyone say that before. That actually solves the squared circle of like, well, all of my values say anarchy's the way to go because isn't liberty the bee's knees? And like, oh well, you're compelling people to do da da da. But then you're like, well, fuck though. If we don't do that, then look at all the other shit we got to deal with. So if you're younger, I guess you have more tolerance for that bullshit. But like when you're older, you're like, my God, I just want to live my life. Like my life is comfortable. Let's face it. Like, do we want to like have to rebuild everything? Do I've spent the last 30 years of my life rebuilding to get back to where we are right now. So yeah, I guess. I mean, guess that's we're on the same page on that one. I guess we're supposed to. A more interesting discussion is finding things we disagree with, though. Um,
I,
architecture is a big one that uh,
Architecture.
yeah, architecture is a huge like from marketing point of view is one of the bigger pro reactionary points of view. Like they show architecture from modern brutalism versus like old cities in Europe, and they're like which one inspires, which one is more human, which is at a human level. And again, there's progressives that want to build human spaces that have like there's definitely there's scientific principles behind design where there's like objective lengths of things like there's like I think it's 5 stories. If you go over 5 stories, people just start to get freaked out and like it just becomes this inhuman world. So I know that's like sounds a little subjective, but there's objective things to get to people's subjective feelings that I mean, I know some people are inspired by skyscrapers, Ayn Rand, and all that kind of stuff. But overall, like the place you want to live in has to be to human scale. It can't just be just massive. It just people don't feel comfortable in those situations. And also like nature being around, so parks, those are all very important. And I know like from a conservative point of view, that's an anti-conservative point of view. Because in conservative point of view, they're like the free market reigns and like and then it's like liberals who are pushing for mandatory parks, at least in my city, when they have the arguments over like mandatory parks. Liberals are like, yes, we should enforce mandatory park laws. And the conservatives are like, nah, free market will provide a park. And then I don't know if they do or they don't, but like they're more like gated communities. Which might be now I'm chalking myself in circles because that might be better because like parks just get loaded up with hobos, and then you can't like it's really hard to kick hobos out because freedom. So it's it just becomes a whole thing. I don't know. I think there's I don't know. Does any of what I'm saying make any sense?
Yeah. Um, I don't think America is reactionary or whatever conservative based in their architecture. Um, we look at the Twin Towers. God, those were some soulless buildings.
Yeah, they're
It's
horrible.
like the skyline improved a little bit when they got removed. But okay, so like I don't see architecture being so reactionary. I mean, like I probably from a pleb point of view, people who are uninitiated to architecture, they're like, yeah, skyscrapers are ugly, brutalism is ugly.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
but everything that's being built in America is some really blasé modernist crap, or it's some sort of I don't know, weird modern art kind of design, which are also horribly ugly. They're like, look, I've put a juxtaposition of pointy things and circles together, and you're like, well, it looks terrible. And they're like, ah, but the juxtaposition, you have to
I actually
appreciate
kind of
it.
like
It's like,
those,
no,
honestly. I like
we
those.
have to live here.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a different consideration. That's true.
so I get in arguments in the architecture groups where someone will post some like cool looking skyscraper that they found or some cool government building. And I'm like, this is absolutely soulless modern crap. And their defense of this like slightly neat looking, considering all these box shaped buildings that have been built over the last 150 years. They're like, yeah, but this one's kind of cool. You're like, it's still horrible and soulless.
Hmm.
Their argument against that is like, well, architects understand things like cost of building materials and stuff like that. I'm like, so you're saying you agree with me that it's soulless and that it's also cheap.
Yeah, that right. It's a totally different. Like that's they're not related. No, I get it. That makes sense.
It's
Yeah, I
like
like
not
that.
only is it soulless, buddy, but it's also made for the least amount of money. So, your point's refuted.
I had a friend that had the
It's
same argument. He's like, "We can't afford a cathedral; they're too expensive." And like, okay, well, that's not the point, is it? No, I never thought about it like that. Wow, that's a good point. Nice. What are your thoughts on
Are
enlightenment
cathedrals
then?
too expensive?
What's that?
Enlightenment's great. I was gonna ask, are cathedrals too expensive? How do they get built? If they're too expensive,
They take hundreds of years
which
to
is
build.
probably yes,
Literally
which is
hundreds of
probably
years. The people that start them never see the end of it. They die.
yes. But
And
why would they build them if they were like, this is too expensive?
and Catholic
Why did they
churches
even get
are
built in the first place?
well, Catholic churches have been known, and even Catholic immigrants in the U.S. have been known to be extra poor to pay for these things, whereas Protestants have these cheaper structures for worship, tend to start businesses
Ugh,
and be
God,
wealthier.
mega churches are just like the pinnacle of terrible architecture. The mega church.
Well, from a Quaker point of view, the building didn't matter because God. So it was like, I mean, they're. I've seen the old Quaker colonial buildings, and they're actually kind of nice because they're like these old wooden structures that are like 2 stories tall or whatever, two or three. But they're not soulless by any means. They're just colonial architecture, which I find to be fairly attractive. Um, I feel like if we were going to return to anything, that would be in the U.S. That's fine. Um, and their street patterns are also more walkable and just more once again more human size. So I mean I know it doesn't scale and I know that we have more people and blah blah blah, but There's a blog called Strong Towns that makes an argument that more people centered architecture is actually more financially feasible over the long term because the big stuff doesn't scale, it doesn't last, and you build a big box store in the middle of nowhere, and then everyone has to drive there, and then you wind up just Walmart just abandons it and it gets a tax write off, and then they just move on, and the community is stuck with this like abomination. And then so like it's just more about it's not even cheaper for Walmart. It's that Walmart gets to offset its expenses to other people. So it's like it's more like moving. So it's two different things. It's like what is the full cost for the whole community, and then what is the cost that the individual person, the way they structure it. So those are two different costs. So over its lifetime, cathedrals last centuries. So the fact that they take centuries to build, and not only that, but like if you talked about maybe the cathedrals in France, for example, the amount of tourism that France gets because of those. Like nobody comes to the U.S. to go to a megachurch, right? I mean, if they're in part of that sect or whatever, and they happen to be local, they'll go to the megachurch from out of town, but they're not going to travel there specifically for the megachurch. But how many people go to Italy to like see cathedrals and art and all that stuff that was made back in the day? Versus how many people go to New York to see all that shit they made in the 30s? All that garbage. I guess a lot of people. Never mind.
There's still really beautiful churches in Detroit, and some of them have been reclaimed. One of them is a music venue now.
Yeah, I bet they're awesome. I bet they have some really good skyscrapers in Detroit, actually, too.
There's the Renaissance Center. That's the big one. And it's like 5 glass uh, cylinders.
When was it made?
Uh, 70s?
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, it's horrible. 70s were horrible for architecture.
Well, that's when it started getting the auto boom back. Our first mega architectural period was in the 10s and 20s, where like despite even the Great Depression going on, the auto industry was still kicking, and I mean a lot of the architecture got canceled because of the Great Depression, but there was so much money being made in the 10s and 20s that we got some really great architecture out of it. It's like a mix of Art Deco and Gothic.
Love to see that.
But the Renaissance Center was built in the 70s, and so it's just soulless window tower crap.
They also had urban renewal as a concept. We're like, oh, let's move all the pores out, and then we can like just have large slabs of concrete in between everything. So I bet there's like large swaths of just like empty concrete, and they're like, this is awesome, because we're just, I don't know why they think it's awesome, but whatever. Maybe it looks good in a picture in their brain, or maybe their brain are so simple they can only think in simple shapes. Um, I've seen the first skyscraper. I think it was the first in the U.S. or maybe the first in the world. It's in Buffalo, New York, and it's fucking amazing because it has like a surface where it has like surface designs on it. When you get closer, you see there's like all these patterns and stuff like that. So from farther away, it's just like intense. It's super beautiful. It'd be really fun to trip and look at it. I think it'd be kind of cool. But otherwise, well, like wandering around downtown Buffalo would probably wouldn't be fun when you're tripping. But that one building is cool. So, yep, architecture. Wow, we're on the same page on that. Wow. I knew we were on the same page about a lot of stuff. So, the definition, I guess, was the main thing that was we were getting hung up on, which is, I think, a waste of time.
We haven't answered the question yet, is why would people spend the time and the money it takes to build not cheap architecture?
Well, I mean, a couple of reasons. One is they didn't have any options. The other one is faith. Like they're basically embedding their faith in this building, and it's like this building is where they're going to have mass, which is their connection to another realm. And to people who believe in Catholicism, it's a transcendent experience where you connect to the other side, and the other side is a more perfect Platonic universe. So that's why. And I mean, to have that level of connection with the spiritual realm is it's not true that any building. I guess if you're super spiritual or whatever, you could be touch God in a in a shit house. But like if you're like a normal person, definitely the set and setting matters. And if you have like the incense and the statues and the light coming through the stained glass windows and you hear the choir, you're definitely in a different realm than if you're just like sitting quietly in a a barn house or whatever the Quakers would do.
Okay, let's do a. I know we're on the same page on this. I'm just trying to draw this out so that things are actually said instead of assumed.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're a time traveler and you're one of these modernist capitalists who goes back to, I don't know, uh, 1400, and you go to some town where they're building a cathedral and you're like, why are you doing this? This is like really expensive and it's going to take 100 years to finish your cathedral. You know, if you use cheaper materials and did it without all the fancy stuff on it, you could get it done in 20 years.
Hmm.
So what do you suppose the villagers' response to them would be?
I think he's a lunatic. I think they would just like be. I mean, they'd think. I mean, at best, they probably think he's like an agent of Satan to tempt them. Yeah, because they'd be
Okay.
like, they're like we I mean they're not. They probably thought of that. I don't think people are as dumb as like they're made out to be. So I'm pretty sure that somebody thought of that already, and they that crossed their minds. We could cut corners on this, but it's like you're gonna cut corners on your connection with God. Like it just sounds. It's just so out of step with where they're at. They're like, we want this to be the
Right.
best it can
So
be.
the point that I'm getting to with this is that they built these things that we're gonna say cost inefficient,
Sure.
because it was important to them to build them this way, um, because they valued them. Um, so it's like, what do we not value the buildings we live in now? Do we not value the spaces that we live in now?